Last November, Hasan Piker, a popular influencer and left wing political commentator in America, visited China for the first time, broadcasting the trip to hundreds of thousands of viewers on his gaming platform Twitch. It came at a moment when many Americans are deeply dissatisfied with their economy and their political system, and they've increasingly turned to China as an alternative. Piker is a self described socialist, and he's a staunch critic of American capitalism. He told me he long wanted to see for himself how a communist government ran a country, and he wasn't disappointed. Here's my conversation with Hasan Piker.
Yeah. So, I mean, you said like there's been a change of attitude about a lot of people with regards to
Yeah,
China. And you also said, I have had a change of attitude. I have not had a change of attitude about China. Um, uh,
right.
so for
Yeah,
me, it was more so just like seeing what I was already talking about in action and seeing it in real time, like whether it be the development or whether it be like the what I suspected were rumors about like everyday Chinese existence. Either great exaggerations in Western press or outright fabrications in general. So it was more so an experience like seeing it in real time. One of the examples I use always is I went with a bunch of people who had these kinds of negative opinions about China, these fears, given that its presentation, I think, in the Western world for the uninitiated is kind of like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, like a hermit kingdom style approach. If you recall, JD Vance said even as recently as a couple months ago, it said like, oh, it's a nation
yeah.
of peasants, which is very
Peasants,
frustrating
yeah.
for the Chinese netizens for understandable reasons. But like overall, I think that's still by and large the average American's attitude towards China. And instantly, as soon as we landed in Beijing airport, the people that I was with who had previously thought that it's like illegal to even show Winnie the Pooh, like, or to have any like Winnie the Pooh imagery at all, were shocked
Yeah.
to find out that like the first vending machine that we saw was like a Disney vending machine, and there was like Winnie the Pooh figurines that they were selling inside of this Disney vending machine. So it's little things like that that I already knew were greatly exaggerated, like a social media ban over referring to Xi Jinping as Winnie the Pooh being it turned into this like major story in the Western news. That's why like a lot of people will still do that thing when they're talking about China, even like well-intentioned liberals. So
This was your first time in China?
yeah.
So tell me about how you were able to overcome that narrative. Like, is it something about the specific like media space and ecosystem that you're in that you're kind of you sort of absorb other kinds of information? I mean, I'm curious sort of where your sort of views of China formed.
Sorry. For me, I grew up in Turkey, so I've had a very different approach to like Western narratives in general. I guess I grew up not being too trustful of the Western State Department narratives about like enemies of America and therefore I that skepticism, I guess, like leaked into my analysis of China as well, where I was like, is this actually real? So then I just like sought it. I sought out further information. I think it was, if I recall, like one of my first interactions with this kind of like anti-China coverage that's been around and it still very much exists was around ghost cities. And I guess like it also, that transformation also happened at the same time when I was like learning more about socialism as well. And developing my own personal worldview. So that was what caused me to be doubly skeptical, I guess, of the official narratives. But I remember reading into ghost cities or like what the actual intentions behind like building these robust infrastructure projects and development projects was, and the approach from the Chinese government was more so that obviously they wanted to increase the amount of development around housing, but there was a specific purpose for it, from what I understood, and that made a lot more sense to me. That like it wasn't just to create economic activity necessarily, although that certainly helped, give people jobs, have some kind of economic activity and have investments for people to you know, put their savings into. But it was also for people to live in, right? Like it was housing, which is a major issue in the Western world. It was a radically new approach from my perspective. And I was like, I don't know if these ghost cities are necessarily being built out in the way that we think they are in the Western world. I think they're just like building housing, right? Especially as like there were developments happening in like the edge of cities that were expanding rapidly as well. Like because there are some cities that just never got filled, right? Like there's the famous case of the Paris one. Where they like recreated Paris, yeah. I think. I forget where it is, but like that one never actually got to like full occupancy at all. And it still remains like largely empty, even though there are still a lot of people that live there. So that was my first, as far as I can remember, like that was one of the first instances where I was like, is this as bad as the way people are presenting it? Or is there like an alternative reason for why they're doing it? And then it just expanded from that point on.
Yeah. One thing that I've been interested in thinking about with you is just how younger Americans think about China and how different their views are. Because it strikes me that, you know, for younger Americans, there a lot of them, especially the ones who I think are engaging with China, are less political or at least less ideological. They don't have these kind of ideological blinders. They're also a lot more kind of tuned in with, like, there's a certain kind of cultural vibe aesthetic that comes out of China that you can see on like Little Red Book and these kind of like social media apps that I think older politicians in America don't have any sense of. But I think younger Americans are tuned into. I mean, can you just speak a little bit about that kind of difference that you must kind of be aware of this, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think I Show Speed was a great example of this as well, where like his audience is primarily kids and teenagers, and he probably went through a transformational experience personally going to China. I mean, I talked to him about it. And that's what he said. It was incredible. He was like, is one of his favorite places that he's ever visited. And he thought the experience was unbelievable, going in thinking that it's going to be like this scary place. Because that's what a lot of Americans think. They think it's somehow unique, that the people are going to be like different, that the culture is going to be totally different, that it's not going to be as welcoming potentially, and that there's this like constant mass surveillance, fear of mass surveillance, you know, people talking about social credit, right? Like it's understandable that the average American would be like, what the hell is going on over here? I mean, they're communists. I've been taught to fear communism my whole life. And you know, and then you go there and you're like, wait a minute, they just chill. Another one that I thought was really interesting was the Nelk Boys. The Nelk Boys went to China. You're familiar with the Nelk Boys?
Like an influencer? Are they like an? No, I don't. I'm not.
So they're like a Canadian podcaster troupe that is like deeply in the manosphere. Donald Trump, I believe, credited his like victory to a group of podcasters. One of them that Dana White called out by name was the Nelk Boys in the night of the election victory, where they were like, shout out to the Nelk Boys and Theo Vaughn for, you know, helping us secure this victory. Like that's how right wing these guys are, right? Like, so they're far from the you know, they're not like the average American at all. And they went to China, and I think it was Kyle who was telling the other Nelk that the experience was eye-opening and very interesting, because they thought like, oh, it's going to be so scary. And then we went and we fucking partied hard, bro. That's something along those lines. He was like, we partied freaking hard. And we learned that like, as long as you don't say anything about the leadership or the party, you could do whatever you want. It's just like us. Like, it's just like America. That was their takeaway.
Not drugs. You can't do drugs. Yeah,
well, of course.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not exactly like America, but I would say that like my experience was also somewhat similar in that regard. That was actually very interesting for me as well. Is that like I do think that there is a lot of similarities between China and America in ways that I think most people would not ever think would be so similar, like car-reliant infrastructure, even though they have public transit, obviously, but there is still a car-reliant infrastructure in general. like heavy focus on personal vehicles from all the big cities that I went to. At least that's what I saw. And then also treats. They love their treats, I think, just like we do.
What do you mean?
Commodity consumption. Like there is a lot of, like, more so than other OECD nations that I've been to, like, in Europe and France and all these other places. I feel like culturally speaking, there's more of an emphasis on, like, purchasing goods, and it's a little different, but there is a focus on almost like the fetishization of commodities and consumption in general in the way that you see in America, which is really interesting because it is supposed to be
not a very Marxist thing.
Yeah, it's not. But I mean, I like that personally. So I don't have a that synthesis is something that I also found to be fascinating, and I like it quite a bit because I do think that it's like one of the things that the Western world, the Western capitalist world, has actually nailed fairly well, going all the way back to the party apparatus of the USSR visiting America and being in awe of the abundance of options that are readily available for the average person, or even like the coffee riots that took place in Eastern Europe. Like, treats are an important part of making sure that you have a happy base of support, and I think China has nailed that down fairly well.
So I want to talk a little bit more about your trip, but before we get there, what was the kind of trigger? Like, when you decided to go, first of all, when was that? And was it a kind of FOMO related to Speed's visit?
According to the Chinese netizens, yes. That's why they call me Lemon Bro, but because they say I'm sour about all the love that I Show Speed got in China, because I was, always was one of the few big content creators that is not super anti-China, especially in my realm. Many of the political commentators are like, China is our enemy. They're the worst country on the planet, all this stuff. And I spend a good deal of time, like, cutting through that. But I've always wanted to go. I've always wanted to visit. I'm fascinated by countries that are outside of the American sphere of influence in some ways, and considered foreign adversaries, especially. So I've always wanted to visit China, but the I Show Speed trip at least made it a lot easier for me to sell it to my friends as a concept, because they were like, "Oh, he did this. Yeah. He had a great time. I think we can do it as well."
He kind of opened the kind of door,
and they were still resistant. Like, they were, even after all of that, they were still like, "Oh, I don't know."
Were they afraid that something might happen to you?
Not to me, just in general, yeah. Because they didn't know anything. Like, I kind of understand it. Like, if you're an American and you've learned so much about how scary and dangerous China is as a country, yeah, you're gonna get in there and you're gonna be like, am I allowed to say whatever I want to say? Can I not say everything? Like, what could happen to me potentially? You know what I mean? It's the very real fear in the back of your mind when you're visiting for the first time, I think.
So I've been thinking about this. So I've been, just so you know, I've lived in China for the past 5 years, since 2020. I'm in Tokyo now. I moved last year, but I've been going in and out of China monthly since then. And I've always wondered, what kinds of things I would tell, like, my friends when they come visit, and I feel like I would probably tell them some important things. I mean, for one, I think technologically it's just a nightmare. Like, getting all the new apps.
We did all that. We did all that ahead of time. That was also, like, kind of intimidating for sure. Like Alibaba, you have to get Alipay.
Exactly.
Or
like, how did you? Yeah, how did you sort of overcome that? Okay, so you guys just like had people help you out and like deal with that.
We had friends who had like lived in China, and also on top of that, we hired help. Like, we literally paid for a group to show us around. Like, I think it was like an MCN or something potentially. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah,
but like there were someone from like the tourism bureau walking us around in the cities. I mean, we had time to ourselves as well because we wanted to like explore. But basically, it would have been impossible for us to do like a comprehensive multi-city trip without getting a tremendous amount of logistical help from a Chinese company. So we did that. We
Gotcha.
hired the help of a China, like a local company that I guess is one of these companies that specializes in doing things like this. And I suspect there will probably be a lot more now because like it does feel to me like, judging by Xi Jinping's like the annual address, this is the year that China will focus a little bit more on soft power initiatives in general. So I suspect
They've been
that there will
saying
be
that for like a decade.
I know they're very resistant to that sort of thing to a degree that I think is not even good. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Oh, I mean, they've been trying, Hasan. They've been trying to do that for a long time. I think that the issue is mostly that they do have a branding problem. I mean, especially since Xi Jinping's come to power, it's been really hard to sell because he has made a lot of changes that are more repressive, that are more aggressive, right? So it's just harder for them to sell this kind of panda diplomacy that they used to. But
yeah, I mean, I think what I meant is that there is so much history and so much tradition that is like novel to Americans.
For sure.
And that's what I think is like, that's what I think there's like a lot of room for opportunity. I mean, the reason why I brought that up is because he brought up Black Myth Wukong and Neja, or however you say it, in the annual address. And it's like, those are two, I mean, I love Black Myth Wukong. Like it was an amazing game.
It's sick.
And it was fascinating because like, it's not even a fraction of like, you know, thousands of years of rich tradition and history, but it's novel for Westerners in general because of the Chinese approach thus far. I feel like that's been very focused internally and not really, you know, hasn't made a lot of strides in like reaching and doing any sort of like cultural export.
So you mentioned that you had interacted with the Cultural Bureau. Did they give you any sort of hints about like things not to say, or were you guys aware of, you know, some things to just maybe keep in mind when you're in China of like what not to do?
No, not really. But also, it wasn't the Cultural Bureau. It was a MCN. It was like a private, it was a private company, but they had like they had a local tour guide wherever we went, like for each individual city. And I assume that that's from the local tourism bureau, you know?
Got it. Okay.
That like showed us around. There wasn't any like warnings about what you can and can't say. I mean, there were instances where I was also live streaming on Bilibili as well, while I was there, and iShowSpeed did that too. But, I learned through the process of like going through that experience that there are certain things that people look at you weird about when you say something about it, like mentioning Xi Jinping, mentioning Mao Zedong, in any way. Like, and I wasn't even like, you know, making fun of them or anything. Like I was, you know, I would talk about like, I would talk about Xi Jinping or Mao Zedong in like a historical, as a matter of history. Right. And even then it was like a little bit, like there was definitely a little bit of tension. I wouldn't say it was like, you know, irredeemable or anything like that. It wasn't like, oh my God, how are you doing this? But I did find in my experience that there was an environment of self-censorship for sure, both amongst the people who are tourist or not tourists, but like living there, who are foreigners, and certainly even amongst the local population as well. And that, I would rate it as like that environment of self-censorship changed dramatically once we left Beijing, went to Shanghai. It was much more loose. And then from Shanghai onward, when we went to Chengdu and Chongqing, it was non-existent almost. It was really interesting to see like
how different,
the more Chinese the cities were, the less like tense it was, I guess. Like Beijing, I will admit, as much as I love, you know, the history of Chinese development, the People's Republic of China, as much as I'm fascinated by it, like I will say, Beijing, you feel like you feel like you're being surveilled. you like when you're walking around, you're like, okay, like there's an element of tension, even for someone as like open-minded as myself, where I was just like, I had that feeling in the back of my mind. But Chengdu and Chongqing was awesome. Like definitely the two dopest out of all the cities that we went to. Those two were my favorite, and Chengdu especially was so chill. It is real.
Well,
like
okay,
the,
so I
the
want to
vibes
hear
are
that.
real.
I want
Like
to hear
they are
your
not.
views about that. Yeah.
They're not lying when they say like, oh, this is it's Chengdu that was like the Taoist one, right? Or they say like
the
Chengdu's
Taoist
were the,
one.
well, they told me that Chengdu was you know, I don't think I'm mixing it up. Yeah, I think it was Chengdu where they said that there was like a big Taoist culture and like temples and whatnot, and then also that it's like a very the vibes were dramatically different city to city, like the culture,
For sure.
the language, and all of the different cultural aspects were dramatically different from city to city, and I would say that Chengdu was the most chill.
What do you think about the self censorship? I mean, I think it's safe to say that you have expressed admiration for the political economy of China. Bringing so many millions of people up through poverty. But I think that there's a kind of view among liberals that this kind of socialist system also comes hand in hand with this kind of self repression. And you're saying that you basically had seen this self-censorship firsthand. I mean, how are you thinking about that when you came back?
It's interesting. I don't know how much of it is like cultural differences in general. Like I don't know how much of it is more so just a byproduct of like of existing in a system such as this one versus like I feel like Western liberalism has a social libertarian streak in it, where people want to be offensive, people want
edgy,
to constantly, constantly prod people on issues. I mean, this is like foundational. I feel like to Western civilization, Western society. Not very dialectical materialist of me to make this assessment, but I don't know how much of it is just like a byproduct of cultural understanding. I don't necessarily believe that it has to exist, like any sort of social repression has to exist at all in a socialist or communist structure of governance. Overall, though, I think it's not something that I personally like because I grew up in Turkey. I grew up in Turkey, and then I now live in America. So, like, very clearly, free speech is something that I value and something that I care about. Turkey didn't have it. America is supposed to have it. They're hypocritical. That's a whole different story. I think it was it Ai Weiwei who talked about that as well. His own personal experiences, especially in the last couple of years, being a very famous Chinese dissident living in the Western world, and then post October 7, recognizing that the free speech and egalitarian principles that like European nations have supposedly championed was also built around some lies as well. That there are instances where they also go back on that promise. But
so
in general, I do think it's heavy-handed. I don't think it needs to exist in a different economic organization of society.
I mean, the other thing about China that, in addition to the repression, is that there's just a lot of history that a lot of Chinese don't know. So, for example, I bet that the fans of Speed, who were interacting with Speed, most of them probably wouldn't know about Tiananmen 1989 and what happened in 1989. I mean, there's a lot of things like that in China. So I guess to summarize your view, would it be safe to say that your view is something like, if you were to think about some kind of future governmental system in America, it would look closer to China, but without the repression? Or you think that that's possible?
Yeah. Basically? Oh no, I'm more so focused on controlling the flows of capital, right? I think that's one aspect of Chinese development that I think has been profoundly successful. It's actually a reality that even Western countries are now having to reckon with, right? The alleviation of poverty, a focus on on education, even if it's sometimes, it has downsides as well, this hyper focus on education. But those are the things that I am not only familiar with, but those are things I'm also, those are things I think are valuable lessons we can learn to integrate into our system. But no, not the social repression, or not like, restriction of speech in any way, shape, or form. Or even like any sort of punishments in that direction that yields any kind of like self-censorship.
I'd love to get some more memorable moments from your trip. So you mentioned Chongqing and Chengdu are awesome. Both are places that I've visited. I was just in Chengdu last week. So I'd love to sort of get your thoughts on those places and their differences, because I think that a lot of Americans maybe don't realize how different Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing, and Chengdu are, even though they're all kind of first-tier cities, but they have like clearly very different vibes. And they all have a kind of like, there's even like kind of like beef. I don't know if you've noticed between like Shanghai and some of these places. Yeah,
well,
so tell me a little bit about what
so
you
they
noticed.
were trying to, we were, as white Americans, first they thought we were Russian, which I thought was really funny. But because we were white Americans, they were like, no, we all love each other. Because I kept prodding. I was like, so who's the beef? Like every city has a beef with one another. Like,
huge
and
beef.
I kept prodding, and that was hard to get out of them. But yes, no, I noticed that there's a little bit of a rivalry as well, for sure.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to see like the diversity of it all too, because I think it's like it's beyond the differences in opinion between like Texas and New York City. I think it's like, because at the end of the day, there isn't like a almost totally different dialect in Texas as opposed to New York City, right? Whereas I guess because China is so vast, so large, and these cities have been around for a very long time, much longer than America has been around, that I feel like there is it's almost like a collection of different countries inside of one country.
So any memorable moments from your trip that stuck out to you in terms of like, this is clearly something new or something different, or something that you noticed maybe culturally that's different?
They let us work in a wonton shop in Chongqing, like straight up work the lunch rush. And it was an awesome experience. And I was the busker. I was like bringing people in. And
really?
Yeah. No, for sure. Like we straight up, like my friend Will was literally whipping up wontons in the back. And we were serving the people of Chongqing like wonton soup, wonton dumplings.
And they knew that you were influencers.
Yeah, we had cameras.
Yeah. So they wanted to,
it
like,
was like random people. Like it wasn't. I was literally pulling random people off the street to come into the shop, and that was a really cool experience. Seeing the tunnels was a crazy experience as well. Like seeing the bomb shelters was also a crazy experience. But overall, I think like what's up?
Sorry, so I just wanted to clarify for people who are potentially listening to this, that what you're referring to are the bomb shelters in Chongqing because of during the Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese had bombed Chongqing, and so Chongqing has a lot of raids that used to be have been replaced into bars and turned into like restaurants. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. And then, but for me, I think it's what was the most fascinating thing for me was just like seeing a country run by a communist party have, Gucci stores basically, because it's something that people yell at me about all the time, where they're like, oh, you're a Gucci Marxist, you're a Gucci communist or champagne socialist. And like seeing both of those worlds exist at the same time, where there is like obviously still income inequality, but ultimately like the productive forces are almost entirely centrally controlled in this like totally unique totally unique mode of development was what was the ultimate fascination for me.
I wouldn't say that productive forces are totally centrally controlled, but I'd say that there's a complex mix and like interaction between state and the private sector that kind of produces.
But what I mean is like they ultimately control the flows of capital, and they like move it in a certain direction, rather than being like, you have to do, 15 widgets at the widget factory. And then the next day they're like, okay, now we're moving on from widgets to something else. Like it's not as hands-on, I would say, in comparison to some of these other communist projects. But I think that in and of itself is also fascinating.
Yeah. So you had mentioned at some point, I forget which interview, that China kind of like you kind of see China as like where Japan was like in the 1980s or 90s, when Japan was also this kind of like East Asian technological powerhouse. Did you see that when you were in China? I mean, I know that you were excited about high-speed rail, and I want to get your thoughts on high-speed rail, but anything else that you felt was particularly like, damn, like we don't have this in America, but like that China is like in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, pretty much everything. Like all the cities that we went to were so modern in general. They're very clean, very modern. Seeing all of that from like an American perspective, looking at like the trajectory of a country that is like very clearly still developing, but has areas that have already developed. Because I think 10, 20 years ago, the argument was, oh, this is all, what do they say? Tofu dreg buildings. They're all fake. They're building all these things just to like flex on us, or to make it seem like they have these like, these constructions taking place in China. And then you go and you're like, these are, this is a real city. This is a real metropolitan city. And it's one that I would say is even more modern than American major cities. Right. So in that regard, it does feel like there is a promise of more growth. Like you can feel that the Chinese trajectory is on an upward trajectory. Whereas like when you go to any city in America, I mean, I live in Los Angeles. It was raining earlier today. My internet was going in and out. You know what I mean? It's like, it's things like that where you're like, there's this feeling of living in a big city in the United States where there's like a downward trajectory in general. It's a promise of a new future, an interesting future that I think is also very interesting.
I wanted to ask about the incident where you were stopped at in the Forbidden Palace. Yeah, in Tiananmen Square. Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Like, what actually happened, and any other sort of instances like that where you kind of brushed up against the security state a little bit.
No, that was the only time, and it was really funny because it happened the first day we were in Beijing. So we land in Beijing, we get into our hotel, very nice hotel, one of these like one of these like famous hotel chains internationally, right? And the next morning we have to wake up at 4 a.m. and it's like minus 30 degrees.
Is that for the flag raising ceremony?
For the flag raising ceremony, yes. Have you ever attended the flag? Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're unique. Yeah. That's unique from what I understand.
For sure. Yeah. And like you see so many people. I mean, I think that China and the US are similar in this way, because I think that there's this kind of patriotism that you don't really like, that's kind of unique to the two countries. Like, we love to sing Star Spangled Banner at like every sports event. I'm American as well. I'm from Michigan. Yeah. And Chinese too. Like they do this thing every single day. Like as you saw, and all over the country. Like people come from all over
it blew
just
my
to
mind.
see the flag raising ceremony. It's insane.
That blew my mind.
Yeah.
That level of patriotism, I think, is even more. That level of patriotism is higher than I think American patriotism. American patriotism is like bubblegum. Like you experience it while you're watching a football game and like F-35s fly over or something. Whereas like that reminded me a little bit of Turkish patriotism, where you say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in school, almost. But
I mean, we kind of did that in school, right? Did you grow up in the U.S.? I mean, I did that when I was growing up in Michigan.
Turkey. No, I grew up in Turkey.
I grew up. We had to sing the Pledge of Allegiance. We had to say the Pledge of Allegiance in growing up in Michigan.
Oh, okay. So what I thought was really interesting about it is I asked people my age, like Chinese people that are somewhat more liberal, that live in like big cities, how they felt about it, and they were like, why would I go to the flag raising ceremony? But when we went there, it was people who were like either 7 or 70 and nothing in between. And they were coming from like all different parts of China. I asked the auntie next to me, like, where are you coming from? And they were like, oh, I traveled for like 24 hours to get here to watch this flag get raised in the morning. Basically like a 5-minute experience sitting in the cold. So, but the reason why I'm bringing all this up is because we start off our trip in Beijing, which is, you know, I wouldn't say as welcoming as the other cities are, even though it was very welcoming. The people are very welcoming, but there's like an environment of tension. And we're going to Tiananmen Square, which is a very important place as our guide told us. The most important place is the beating heart of 1.4 billion Chinese who wish to come to Tiananmen Square to see the flag raising ceremony. I mean, she was really patriotic. Okay.
Yeah, that's a little bit. Yeah, I was gonna say
she was definitely laying it. But like, I'm not kidding when I say this. I don't know if she was laying it on because she was like a part of the tourism bureau, or she just like literally lived it as well. Because she was She was very strict. Much more strict than the other cities and the other guys that we had in other cities. So, she gave us this big spiel, and that spiel actually came after one of my friends made the mistake of being like, well, isn't Tiananmen Square where the thing happened? And she got like tense. Yeah.
Really? Oh, interesting.
And that's when she said, Tiananmen Square is where, like, you know, is really important for, you know, the People's Revolution. It's where it's the bleeding heart of, like, we took it from the emperors, like historically, like this place that was for, you know, the super wealthy, exchanged ownership over like warlords and emperors and everybody else, and it was given to the people. So it's a very important place with very important significance for all Chinese people, 1.4 billion Chinese people. So we were just like kind of sitting there, and I was like, oh God, because I was like, dude, you shouldn't have said that. But anyway, So it's 4 a.m. We are shocked, to say the least, because there are tens of thousands of people walking in these massive lines that have come from all around China to get to Tiananmen Square. And obviously that's like the most security theater we've ever encountered, because there are, you know, checkpoints upon checkpoints and, you know, constant face scanning, things like that. To even get to Tiananmen Square for this flag raising ceremony.
By the way, for people who don't realize that going to Tiananmen Square today is harder. It's like 3 times harder than going through the airport security. It's like,
there's a lot of checkpoints for sure.
Yeah.
They do not mess around at Tiananmen Square with their security. So we get in, and I'm really excited. I'm like 6'4", white guy. I think the only white guy at Tiananmen Square on this random Monday morning. And I'm jumping up and down. I'm super stoked. The rest of the group is not as excited as I am. And my producer, because we're live streaming, so my producer in the chat shows a meme of me as my face as Mao Zedong. And that wasn't like, you know, he pulls out a phone and he shows that. And like that to me is like, you know, I'm not even thinking that that's going to be like seen as anything, like it's not going to be seen as a slight, because it's not even like offensive. It's not even, because they don't know that. But like from my perspective, is I'm not, you know, my intention is not to offend. So all of a sudden, boom, we have a young police officer walk up to us in a panic state. And he was like a little bit stern with us. He's like, and he's trying to talk to us in Chinese, and we're like, we don't know what you're saying. And he's like, show me your phone, show me your phone. So we show him the phone, and we're filming from the phone too. We're live streaming from the phone. and we're trying to explain to him like there's nothing on the phone, because like we didn't even understand what was going on at the time. And it was like a 1-minute conversation, and then he was just like, he let us go. Like that was it pretty much.
Got it.
And then we kept live streaming, and it wasn't that big of a deal. I don't know how else other people felt in the group, but it was a very funny first interaction with Beijing and China as well, because we did happen to go to like the one location where there is like, you know, no jokes, no jokes allowed.
No jokes allowed, and and he caught a glimpse of like the one red flag iconography that you were not supposed to see.
Yeah, because I think from his perspective, he probably thinks I'm like some random white nuisance streamer, like a white guy to like make fun of Tiananmen Square or to do something, you know what I mean? Like to be like, this is where, the Tiananmen Square incident happened or something like that. He doesn't know who I am, right? He just thinks I'm a random white guy. And I think like it's understandable that they would assume that like random white people are going to go there and make a mockery of this entire place, which wasn't my intention at all. But we went in, we filmed the whole thing, and it was a wonderful experience overall. It was a very interesting experience overall because I'm not a very patriotic person, which I also mentioned on the stream. So but I am fascinated with patriotic people and like why they feel a sense of patriotism, and I could like kind of understand why, if you're like living in a rural area and your area has like developed so dramatically over the course of like if you've seen development in your lifetime over the course of 70 years that you've been alive, it kind of makes sense why you would feel this like sense of patriotism towards what the Communist Party of China represents for you, I guess, and what the People's Republic of China represents for you. So that was what I was fascinated with. That's what I was trying to like understand. And then that also got clipped as well, and Western media was talking about it because they were like, Hasan Piker, socialist communist streamer, goes to China, gets arrested, detained, killed, murdered, and then also says he's not patriotic for America. And it's like, no, I'm just not like a patriotic person at all in general. But outside of that, there was no other instance where there was any sort of like stress or any sort of pressure whatsoever.
What about the Bilibili experience? Did you get taken down?
When I was in America, I think there were a couple instances where they cut my feed because it was already difficult to like navigate through the VPN structure, and like we had to get whitelisted, obviously, because there are Bilibili content creators that I assume like stream outside of China, right? So there is already like a process that works, like Chinese content creators that go and travel, and then they do travel blogs or whatever. So we had to work with them to like figure all that stuff out, and they were actually pretty nice about it. Like they they got the clearances and whatnot, but there were certain things that would get dinged in the censorship, like in the terms of service. Like you couldn't promote other social media, right? Like that was one of the things. Okay. Like so I had like my banner that said like Twitch this, YouTube this, like all my other YouTube banners and stuff like that. So I had to take that down. When I was live streaming, which makes sense. I mean, some social media platforms have those kinds of terms of service here in America too. And then outside of that, when I came back to America, I wanted to dual stream. So I wanted to stream in the United States of America my regular live broadcast that I do every day, but to Bilibili, because there is a lot of clips of mine that go viral on Bilibili and all these other Chinese social media platforms already, but they're chopped up from my stream, right?
Got it.
So I thought, I can just like easily live broadcast to the Chinese audience as well. This will be like, I knew that it was not going to be easy, but I thought this could be a cool attempt. And we found out that because I spend a good deal of time going on Twitter and going on like Western social media platforms, that it almost felt like a workaround to be able to like intercept the firewall, basically, because it's in real time. So I understand why they were like, you can't, you can't do that. Like I'm not banned off the platform or anything. I can like I still have an account on the platform. I can still stream on the platform, but I can't stream the way I want to, where I like look at Twitter links, you know what I mean? So that's the reason why I'm just not streaming on Bilibili.
I see. I wanted to ask you about like I'm curious about your audience in China. Like, were you able to interact with people who were like big fans of you, and like what were they like, and like compared to your fan base in America, like is there kind of similarities between the two or differences?
Yeah, definitely. It was really interesting. There was one experience where someone came up to me and was like, Oh, I'm a huge fan of you. I've been watching
Where
you
was
for
this?
years. I think this was in Chongqing or maybe Chengdu. I think it was in Chengdu.
Yeah. Which, first of all,
And
remarkable that they have to go through the firewall to see you, and so the fact that you're able to
yeah,
have fans in
well,
Chongqing and
from
Chengdu
what
is
I
amazing.
understand, like it's not. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but from what I gathered, people, the VPN usage is very liberal out there. It's not like maybe there are times when the government stresses it more, but like everybody knows that like the only time when someone stressed that VPNs are not allowed was the border patrol in China. Well, I forgot when we were first walking in, they were like, "Oh, what do you do?" They started asking like questions like, "Oh, what do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I'm a Twitch streamer," like all this stuff, right? And they're like, "Oh, what is Twitch?" And I was like, "Oh, well, don't you have a VPN?" And they were like, "No, VPNs are not allowed." But it was the police, like it was the border police saying that. But I very quickly found out nobody actually gives a shit about the VPN restrictions in general. Like everybody uses it. People know that they use it. I mean, after all, AT&T, when you turn on your phone in China, AT&T automatically has a VPN in your in your eSIM that you're using or in your SIM card that you're using. AT&T automatically pings it to the Hong Kong servers. So you don't even need to use a VPN, really. You just can't use any of the American apps necessarily.
So let me just add one quick note about that. Like, I think that in general, VPN use is pretty widespread in first tier cities among a certain young population, but it gets a little bit diffuse. Like the kinds of people that would go to the flag raising ceremony, I think that they're probably pretty underrepresented in the VPN use. But when you're in Chongqing and Chengdu, I mean, that's a very it's also like a very young city now. Like it's changed a lot since you've come. Like you came last year, so this is you're at the kind of tail end of this kind of like really interesting boom that's happened in China, where a lot of young people have moved from first tier cities in the coast like Shanghai and Beijing to Chengdu and Chongqing. And so it's very trendy now, and it's become this kind of like VPN using, Hasan Piker watching crowd that you and Speed have enjoyed.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see that though, because I think the VPN basically limits access for the large majority of people who are just never even going to encounter it and they don't really care, right? But if you have any sort of appetite for Western content, it's like fairly easily accessible from what I understand. Like
That's true.
It's not like it's not like a massive issue or like super illegal or something. It can become illegal. Obviously, I understand that because like in Turkey, you use VPNs to access certain sites too. That's why I know. There was a guy, as I was saying, there was a guy in Chengdu who said, "I'm a huge fan of you." And I was like, "Oh," and I immediately assumed that this person had at least was either American born Chinese or was a Chinese guy that went to school in America at some point. Cause that's usually a lot of my fans that would come up to me and were like, "Oh, I went to school here, whatever." Right.
Yeah.
And no, he was like, "No, I'm born and raised. I never left China." I was like, "Okay, that's crazy. Cool." And he was like, "You got me out of the red pill. Like you got me out of the red pill, alt-right pipeline."
Yeah. The American. Yeah. Wow.
And that's when I was like, Xi Jinping, that's when I thought to myself, Xi Jinping, you got to strike down these VPNs, big dog. I don't know what's going on here.
Maybe Xi Jinping wants the red pill.
You can't be having young, what?
I thought maybe Xi Jinping wants the red pill. Yeah.
I don't know. You can't be having, well, I guess, but you can't be having, young Chinese minds be corrupted by the American version of however they present masculinity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, this is a really interesting topic that, Hasan, I think that you should be aware of, which is that the gender, this kind of debate around feminists and red pill men in China is intense, is intense as it is in the U.S., which is a fascinating phenomenon. But we also see this in South Korea. We see this in, we see this in a lot of places. But the space that you there isn't a Hasan Piker in China. There isn't somebody,
of course,
like you who can kind of pull people away from the red pill, which is oftentimes connected with nationalists and this concept of the little pinks, these like really high ultra nationalist Chinese youth, and so he like it makes sense to me that you are playing that role for some people in China, which is actually really quite remarkable.
Yeah, it was definitely a shock to me that like I can understand why someone who is someone who's Chinese, born and raised in China, is like fascinated with American culture, and they like see my commentary and they're like, oh, this guy isn't so like anti-Chinese, I guess, you know what I mean? And then they start listening to other stuff. But the fact that they were like getting content from people who are like expressly and outwardly anti-China in ways that are fairly hateful, that was what was so shocking to me. You know what I mean? As far as like the manosphere red pill content. So that is something I was thinking about, but you're, of course, the gender wars is very much alive and well everywhere around the world. I don't know if it's, I mean, you know this better than I do. I don't know if it's as bad as it is in South Korea. I feel like, because everything is so heavily controlled by the government, like the flows of information is very restricted by the government in general, that like I feel like if they have ambitions that people need to repopulate, for example, right, they'll be like, we need to focus more on traditional lifestyle, so that's what we're going to focus on. That's what we want the content creators to be making content around, as opposed to like the American version of that. I feel like is very the American version of that is pretty crazy. It's not. I don't know how like it's. I don't know how anyone who is Chinese could find that appealing in general, because it's very I think it's very nationalistic, very pro-America.
What is pro-America? The traditionalist view, or
no? I'm saying like the traditionalist, like red pill content creators here in America. They're like they're very pro-America. They're very pro-West. They feel like a sense of like Western superiority. They think Chinese people are, I mean, they make racist memes about Chinese people, stuff like that. So that's why I'm like, how does that not get you out of it?
It's interesting. No, it's so interesting that you say that, because that's a phenomenon that I've noticed as well, is that, oftentimes these kinds of more masculine, young masculine sort of red pill figures in China, the equivalent would be some kind of like ultra nationalist, kind of anti-feminist, misogynistic, a person who's online always typing and sort of slinging barbs at women. They tend to have a kind of affinity towards each other, even though they're both kind of racist and kind of anti. Like this is the same reason why they're like nationalists kind of prefer to deal with Trump sometimes, over like somebody like Biden or But anyway, I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent.
But are they nationalists? Are they nationalists like pro-China nationalism, or are they like what is it? Because there's a so that's what I'm so shocked by it, right? Because if you're like a pro-China ultra nationalist, hyper nationalist guy, and you get your notes and you get your content from like a guy who is very clearly like anti-China, that's like shocking to me. You know what I mean? If I guess is ideologically, I'm so far removed from that. I'm so totally on the opposite end of that spectrum that like, if I saw someone who was like super nationalist in China as opposed to like communist or whatever, I'd probably be like, this is a little strange for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how does that ideological What's up?
They agree. They disagree. Of course, they disagree with that, and I've talked to nationalists who find that off-putting, but they're more drawn to the kind of intense. Well, I mean, I think you're aware of this, right? Like these kinds of influencers, like these red pill influencers, are magnets for for like lost men who are kind of like who can't really find a place in their society, who feel like culture has shifted significantly to the left, especially around like female rights and so like women's rights. And so what happens is like they see this kind of affinity with the way that they're attacking the enemies domestically. And they find that to be more resonant with them, and they kind of airbrush the they sort of like move that kind of anti-China stuff to the side. So they don't like the foreign policy thing, of course, but it's kind of like they see them as allies, as secondary to this kind of domestic, or they have these other sort of social concerns that I think that they worry about, and that might be. Yeah. I mean, I may be being a little bit too simplistic about the way that they think, but that's my general impression.
I can understand why it would be like that in Japan, right? I can understand why it could be like that in South Korea, because like South Korea and Japan are in the sphere of American influence. So like most of these guys are not going to say something like super anti-Japan or super anti-South Korea. But China is the enemy from the perspective of like many American liberals, even like not just the right here. So I feel like that's why I'm like shocked by it. But in any case, in this circumstance, it worked. I was able to pull him out of the alt-right pipeline, which I think is very very funny.
Which is incredible. So
American brain rot is so pervasive.
Yeah. So what do you think about can I get your thoughts on the criticism of like, since you've come, like, I mean, I'm sure that you have been criticized going and back.
Of course.
Like what have you been hearing? I mean, and are there what is the primary sort of criticism from people that you've heard from?
Some people say I'm paid by the Chinese government, and I always laugh and say I wish, because we spent so much money on that trip. I'm like, I wish the Chinese government paid me. But that's usually just the number one thing is like, you hate America, you love China, you went to China to do propaganda for China, things of that nature. And that's pretty much it. I mean, people are like normal people that aren't like political operatives they just think it's fascinating. Like they think it's cool. They're like, oh, how was it? Right? Like that's usually the conversation I have with normal people. But political operatives will be like, oh, you are an enemy of the state. And you are a propagandist for China, even though I've been very critical of numerous aspects of like Chinese governance, and more so am fascinated by the difference in their governance when it comes to the economy, like how they manage the political economy, how they manage the economy in general.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the criticisms. Like what are you critical of when it comes to the government? I mean, we've already talked about repression. I mean, is there anything else
obviously
that you find
Xinjiang, dragnets, mass surveillance initiatives, things of that nature? I think it's like super heavy-handed. Like I understand the argument from the Chinese government, but I just think it's a human rights violation in general. Like that's not, I also understand why people in Hong Kong are resistant to the one country, two systems approach, because like, once again, it comes back to social repression. Like people don't see Chinese control in a positive way, especially if they've been living under a Western system, because the Western system gives you at least like it gives you more freedoms in terms of what you can say. It makes you feel like you have a say in the process, and that's important for a lot of people. Like understandably, a big part of my argument in the West is, of course, that our two options are oftentimes not reflective of the real material needs that we have. Democrat versus Republican, but that's besides the point. Like the very fact that you have this pressure valve of the democratic process, and the very fact that you have at least like this established almost social libertarian culture, that's very alluring for people, and they don't want that to go away. It's understandable that you don't want it to go away. So it's things like that I am critical of.
But you don't want that to go away either, right?
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, I don't want that to go away. No, and I mean I'm pretty critical of the American government currently moving in that direction. It would be very hypocritical of me to say no, that's fine. Although sometimes I do go back and forth, because like the brain rot here is pretty severe. So sometimes I'm like, maybe we should be a little bit more restrictive. But then I know that restriction is going to inevitably restrict at the direction of what the American government wants. And we've clearly seen what that looks like with Israel and commentary surrounding Israel and all of the initiatives that the American government has taken, both first under the Biden administration, 3,500 student protesters being arrested, and then now with the Trump administration, that like accelerating pretty severely with like surveillance lists that the Department of Homeland Security now has for like anti-ICE protesters, anti-Israel protesters in general as well. So it's pretty terrifying. So I fundamentally am at odds with any sort of social repression of that sort. I would say that that's one of my bigger criticisms with the way that things work in China.
Yeah, so I wanted to share a little bit about like my process, my thought process, because I've also been thinking about this for reporting on China. Is that it's become harder over the years as a reporter to go after China on a number of things because of the way that America has been behaving. Not that journalists go after, but we oftentimes will write critically about certain things that China does, right? And so we'll write about their protectionism, trade protectionism, or what they're doing in Xinjiang, or all these the security state. And then when the West starts to do that and more, it becomes harder to write about China from that perspective. And maybe that's a good thing. Like I think for me, like I've written, I've changed the way that I write about China a little bit because of what I'm seeing in the United States. That being said, I think that there's still significant differences, right? Like I think that you have to say that there's a difference. Like I think China, if you look at the ranking of like free speech, there's like a list of like countries, and I think America is somewhere in like the 50s, which is already kind of pretty low. Like from 1 to 50, I think that's not good. But China is at 178 of 180. So the only two that were below China is North Korea and Eritrea. Like that's not a good. That's still a categorical difference, right? And like the thing about Don Lemon, like he was arrested, and that's still playing out, but that is a national story. Whereas in China, there's so many Don Lemons. Like there's just so many Don Lemons, and it happens all the time, right?
No, it's the same with Turkey. Like there is no free speech in the Turkish constitution at all, and I can't go back to Turkey because I've written extensively about the Turkish coup that happened, and I wasn't even all that critical of the Turkish government, but like it's not. It's not great. I know that if I go back, I will have issues. Like I might go to jail, and because I'm a Turkish citizen as well, and I know the American government is not trying to get me out. Like I know for a fact they'd be like, you can keep them,
right?
So
right.
So yeah, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's why I said like Ai Weiwei's like approach to it has been fascinating because he's experienced Chinese state repression. And he is a dissident. Like he is a person who was like incredibly critical, and then for him to also experience it in the West, especially after October 7, it's like it's been really fascinating to see that unfold. Where he's like, "Oh, these guys are hypocrites too. I didn't realize that there wasn't like, at least China is like." At least China is also like offering something to the citizens in general. Because from my Chinese relatives. I always and my friends that now live here, where I talk to them, like it was always like there's certain things you can't say that you all know, and as long as you don't do that, you're fine. You have this knowledge that like the government will take care of you. Like there is a social cohesion around that. But if you obviously want to become a dissident, or if you see something that is like truly an issue, I guess in the case of Ai Weiwei was the earthquake, right? Like there was this massive earthquake, and like all these students had died, and he wanted to criticize the government over it, and the government was like, you can't do that. Like we're gonna put you in prison and we're gonna beat you up. And then he wanted to criticize the fact that he got beaten up, and he wanted to make a performance art piece out of it. And I feel like it's the American government hasn't gotten to that level yet, but I think the reason why the American government hasn't gotten to that level yet is because America has been the hegemonic superpower. And I have this belief that, at least now, I have this belief that like the First Amendment as a foundational principle is almost afforded to a country like that because we are not considered disruptive enough. Like I as a person can be a socialist, a communist, whatever I want to be in America, because I can't cause any instability in the eyes of the state, right? Because the state is so powerful. Whereas I feel like it stems from a place of insecurity, basically, a place of vulnerability. When you think speech and being a dissident is a problem, that means that exposes a weakness in your own mechanism of governance. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I do think that you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like there will be loosening of restriction if China becomes more of a power player around the world in terms of speech in general.
I mean, so the reason why it's hard for me to think that is the case is because I feel like the repression now has been worsening over my 5 years that I've been here. It's gotten worse in China. So and so like here's just, let me just give you like some examples of this. Like since the pandemic, when China was locked down, there's a whole host of things that you just could not say with the government, and the government became a lot more censorious during that period, and it never really relaxed after that. So a lot of people in Shanghai, I don't know if you knew, but Shanghai was under lockdown, so they couldn't actually there was a period where for 2 months I experienced this, like we didn't have enough food, and we couldn't actually, like, nothing was working, like we couldn't even get basic medicine and food, and people were trying to basically express their issues online, which is the only way that they could possibly do it, and the government censored that, and so a lot of people died during that period, and it's still not a topic that can be discussed in China, right? And so there's examples of this that are that the government has gotten worse over time. But the irony for me is that China has gotten richer and more successul in that same period. And so I think that for me, it's been a curious thing. Like I think I also share your intuition, which is that surely, when you become more powerful and more successful, you should give people, especially just for social stability's sake, because people are going to want more freedom of expression. So the government should allow you to open up the space for free expression. But what I've noticed in the past few years in China has been this kind of strange paradox where the government has become more successful, but they've started to tighten up more and become more repressive. And I think that it has to do with the way that they relate to the world, especially the United States. Like, I think that in times when they felt that the United States was in a more collaborative posture, they were more willing to open up society, let people talk. But then now they feel like when the U.S. is more anti-China, when the government voices are more anti-China, there's more repression domestically. I mean, I've talked to a lot of dissidents who say that they feel that their experience with the security state always gets worse whenever, like Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan, or when Shinzo Abe says that we're going to have to defend Taiwan from Chinese attack, or when politicians say these things that create tension within the relationships diplomatically, that creates more repression domestically. If that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense, because this goes along with my theory, which is that, like, I'm going to Cuba with a humanitarian aid flotilla, and much has been said about, like, the Cuban governance and the repressive nature of, like, the Cuban government, right? And I think it's a lot more understandable, especially when I judge it by, like, the American standards of, like, moments of repression of political speech in American history in times of war, right? Whether it be the Cold War or like World War I, World War II. Like, there have been a lot of instances where the American government has considered speech to be disruptive and have punished people criminally, right? Draft dodgers, conscientious objectors, things of that nature. People were branded as communists and or even like civil rights leaders, right? Sometimes were directly assassinated. So the way I see it is, like, in times of, like, it's almost seen as like a necessity by some of these countries that exist in the periphery or outside of the scope of America that have been branded as foreign adversaries, because there's so much outside interference from America that's, like, super direct too. It's not like they hide it, right? Especially with Cuba, that the government as a mechanism of sovereignty tries to do its very best to just like clamp down on dissent. And maybe in some instances they also like that, where it's like, okay, we're dealing with, we can use outside intervention as a reason to say, you can't say certain things. So that's the way I interpret it in general, because like, at the end of the day, I think like all matter of leadership still want to at least manage their nation state. Like it's not like people are doing it specifically so they can eat, lobster rolls or whatever. And as the people suffer usually, even though that's the case that people present for American foreign adversaries, that's not the reason. Like they want to thrive. They want to have sovereignty. And this is one of the lines of self-defense that these countries engage in, which is why I think China is in a unique situation, because it is becoming this like incredibly powerful force around the planet. And therefore, I almost see it as like a burden to have any sort of limitations on speech, or at least have such strict controls over the speech of its own citizens, because I feel like it's, especially given like the surveillance mechanisms that exist, like figuring out what's like valid criticism or valid dissent coming from within versus, hatred being fomented by outside influences like the CIA or whatever is probably fairly easy to distinguish. And therefore that's you know what
Sorry,
I
go
mean?
ahead.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just, it feels, the more powerful you become, the more ridiculous it almost becomes that you would have such a strong censorious approach.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this point, but like I think that I was thinking about your I was reading some of your commentary about China, and you do mention there's a history in China of foreign intervention, right? I mean, they've been invaded many times by the British and by the Americans, and Shanghai is still a kind of you can see the remnants of the concessions in Shanghai. So China has always felt like their regime is like kind of vulnerable to foreign adversaries. And so what you see in China is, and in a lot of authoritarian countries, is that they see this through that lens in any kind of situation where their regime is in trouble, right? So when there's a protest among the citizenry, they assume that there is some kind of black hand, American forces that are sort of sowing discord, and I think that kind of paranoid thinking, I don't know if maybe it's just propaganda, but I think that there's genuine people within the regime that truly believe that whenever there is I think that there's a kind of confident, patriotic Chinese who thinks we did so much for you guys. If you guys are actually pissed off at us, like it must be because the CIA has like helped you. I mean, I've seen this before. Like I've seen this kind of view, and so I wonder whether, I don't think that kind of thinking is amenable to what you're saying about this kind of gradual enriching process that kind of softens the public sphere. But that's my that's just my
no
two cents.
I get it. I think, I mean, there's also validity for that fear due to the historical reasons, but also on top of that, like here, it's valid to say, hey, the uncertainty surrounding the lockdowns is terrifying for the average person, right? Like that's totally a valid fear and valid concern that the citizens may have. But then on the other hand, you got the New York Times writing about it. So then when the New York Times is writing about it, they're like, oh, see, they're trying to foment instability in the country. So we got to be extra hard in like cracking down on this sort of speech. And this is not even a justification for the actions of the government, right? I'm just saying that, like, I can see why, if I were to put myself in the shoes of like a foreign adversary, like leading a country, that kind of stuff plays a role in the heavy-handed approach that the government takes. And then also on top of that, they probably don't mind that this is like a repressive force that makes it easier to control the public.
Yeah. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, do you think that China is socialist in your kind of definition and value system?
I think it's. I mean, I'm not like. I'm much more pragmatic than someone who is an orthodox Marxist, and And that's why I stress the controlling the flows of capital thing in terms of like the way that the Chinese economy is developed. Do I believe that China will inevitably transition into? I mean, do I believe that China is a transitional socialist state? Yes, I think it's an attempt. It's an attempt in that direction. Do I believe? I mean, it's not a communist state. Obviously, there's no such thing. Like it's never really existed. But I think the state has found this very unique this unique structure where they still take some of the valuable lessons of decentralization in terms of like promoting in terms of promoting and like fostering
Gucci,
successful
boba, all the consumption is decentralized.
That for sure. But I meant like in terms of like developing stuff, right? Like manufacturing goods, especially like light goods. There is like, it feels like it's much less restrictive in terms of like what you can produce. And I explain it as like the Chinese government like wears capitalism like a sleeve almost, where there is still
that's a funny metaphor.
There is still there's still control over the productive forces, like a lot more control over the productive forces and like what you get to do, in comparison to like the American system where we have like subsidies. But if a company wants to use subsidies to engage in stock buybacks, they can do so, right? Whereas I feel like in terms of like the 5-year plans that they set in motion, they're like, we're going to move on from real estate, right? That's what happened in the last like decade. They were like, all right, we built a lot of housing. We're moving on from real estate. We're going to move into what direction? Renewable energy and also electric vehicles. So then boom, all of a sudden, flows of capital move in that direction. And then everyone's like, it's time to build, it's time to make EVs. And I feel like that's a unique system that doesn't exist in the Western world at all, which is why they constantly complain about it and say China is actually cheating in international trade. It's like a major point of contention with the European markets because they're impossible to compete with.
I mean, one thing that I feel is really different about China from what you would expect in a kind of Anglo-American sort of socialist perspective is that all of this kind of government intervention and kind of interaction with the productive forces, so to speak, they don't tend to end up in just ordinary people's hands. Like what you mentioned about the high-speed rail. I mean, high-speed rail is public, so there's an argument to be made that there are also there's a lot of investment in these like public infrastructure, and that is a kind of common good. But EVs, right? Like this intense focus on EVs and in climate change. I mean, these are long-term things that drive China's technological. It looks cool, right? Like when China's government supports robots. If you saw the Spring Festival yesterday, there was or 2 days ago, there's this enormous push about robotics.
I don't much care for robots and stuff, but yeah, I mean, everybody here thinks it's super cool. They love it.
So one thing that I think is almost contradictory to the view that China is a socialist country is that Xi Jinping has said himself that he does not like welfarism, and he wants Chinese citizens to eat bitterness, and he doesn't like this kind of like cash direct cash transfer. So a lot of this is like abundance. It's like China focusing on the supply side and not on the demand side. I mean, I was wondering whether you were aware of that.
Oh no, I fully agree. I don't think like welfare necessarily is a socialist concept anyway. I think it might have been Lenin who said, or it might have been Marx who said, like, or no, it was definitely Lenin who said, like, you're gonna still work, right? At the end of the day, it's a totally different approach. Like welfare is a social democratic approach that in many instances like offers a lifeline. It's more so about, my focus is more so about controlling, like having some kind of control at the end of the day over capital. We have these mechanisms in America as well. We just never apply them. Like the Defense Production Act and things like that will only be seen as a last resort. And in most circumstances are never deployed. Like we have eminent domain. We rarely ever use it unless it's like super necessary, I guess. And I feel like the Chinese system is more efficient for that reason because there is like the state is more powerful. The state is more powerful than capital. Whereas in America, and in the Western world in general, capital dominates the state. So the states, the state will dish out funds at the behest of capital rather than at the behest of like a vision that they might have. That's what I mean as far as like dominating the forces of capital. However, of course, there's like, I'm sure there's a distribution process that's still, like rewards people who are within the party structure. You know, I don't know that degree, what level of corruption exists. But at the end of the day, it's still done for a different purpose. Like it's still the industrial focus is done with a higher purpose in mind. And also on top of that, the surplus value is then still allocated back to development projects, building out the tier 1 cities, and then also building out like the tier 4 cities and turning them modernizing the countryside, for example.
Right. I mean, I think, that's my view of China is that there's this kind of focus on development. There's this constant focus on development and making things look nice and things that the public can share, like, roads and bridges. And there's a lot less, there's almost no appetite for a kind of redistributive policy that provides spending cash for ordinary citizens. I mean, that has been a really big pain point for a lot of leftists in China, like people who are who have similar views to you.
I've heard that there's like a Maoist resurgence almost, where there's more people saying like the class struggle continues in China.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's also fascinating because like the established attitude, the established cultural attitude is not capitalist inherently. Whereas like in America, the solution when there's a problem is more capitalism. Whereas in China, the solution when there's a problem is like, let's do socialism, let's do more socialism. And that is actually fascinating to me, someone who grew up in both Turkey and then, the United States of America, a person who has only known, one way of doing business.
That's
and
right.
Like relying on one ideological commitment only, or being severely limited in our political approach to like fixing problems. It's always like, oh, we got to bring in private enterprise. Like private enterprise is a solution to this. So that's also something that I find to be fascinating, because like the domineering culture or the domineering attitude is that there needs to be more socialism rather than there needs to be more capitalism.
Yeah, I get that. The last couple questions I have for you is just your view about like what kind of message you might have to somebody like, I think that you had talked to Lena Khan, this kind of typical democratic establishment figure about their attitudes towards China. Like now that you have come back from China, like what would you say? Like I don't know if you've talked to her like when you came back, like what would you say to them?
I haven't talked to her about my China trip at all. I was supposed to have her on the broadcast when I was in New York, but we just didn't, like there were time constraints. But as far as like, I mean, I don't really talk to American politicians about China at all, because it's like, it's not even, no one knows anything about China. They not only do they not know anything about China, if they are curious about what's going on in China, they have a very different approach than I do, that I think is like not as open-minded or even
it's
agnostic.
Just a security mindset. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
National security concerns trump all. And this is like analysts that I talk to who are not even analysts in America, like analysts around the globe that I talk to, all share the same concerns. When it comes down to talking about China, they can be the most woke person. They immediately shut it out, where they're like, there is a sense of Orientalism in their approach, 100%, where they think like, oh no, they're just different. Their attitude is different. Their worldview is different. They're different. You can't trust them. Like that's oftentimes the sense I get, which is great for me because it has helped me make better predictions, even with like the tariff war that was taking place with China, where I was like, the Chinese government's like pretty open about like what they're going to do, especially when it comes to like matters of international affairs, where they're just like, this is unacceptable. This is our red line. Don't cross it. Right. And I'm also more aware of, I guess, like the seemingly more aware of like what kind of manufacturing behemoth they are than like the average American analyst is, who was constantly talking about how China is in a state of collapse. Any moment now, it's going to fall apart. Like that's usually the attitude that many people have in this space.
Right.
So that's given me an upper hand, I guess, in terms of my analysis. But usually I don't talk to American politicians about China as much, but I think I'll probably be talking to them a lot more in like the next 5 years, because I don't know if you saw the New York Times article, but someone was like, I just came back from China and they're dominating us. Like it was like a straight up New York Times article that I never thought I would read in the New York Times, where it was like, they are destroying us. Like it's not even a comparison. They're owning us pretty heavily. So I think that is going to open up more opportunities for people to like look at what they're doing differently, and what kind of lessons we can learn from their development.
Yeah, so that's my last question to you, is just that there's a kind of trend, as you've noticed, of like people, including you, going to China and coming out and being like, I saw the future. I mean, Tom Friedman has done it. There's several people in the New York Times have done it. This has been going on. This has intensified since last year. I wanted to get your thoughts on the timing of that, like why you think that it's happening this year. Like, is it reflective of something about America that you're noticing? So tell me a little bit about that.
Oh no, it's American material conditions deteriorating. It's an inevitability. It feels like you're like a party apparatchik visiting an American grocery store for the first time after leaving the USSR and going, wait, this is available? All of this is available for everyone? What the fuck? Like, that's what it feels like. If you go to China, you're like, what do you mean? You got an abundance of different options of travel. Like, people aren't even using the airlines that much, because even though China is so vast, like high-speed rail is so accessible. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, these are, when you go there and you're like, but it doesn't make sense. We thought that this was a country that was extremely poor not that long ago. Like, how did this development take place in such a short period of time? Like, they must be utilizing their resources a lot better than we are here in America. And I think it's impossible not to have that be your main takeaway. Like, you would have to be you would have to have been propagandized so exceptionally to go to China and be like, what they've done in the last 4 decades is anything short of a miracle. If you were to look at that and be like, no, this still sucks, and I think the American way is actually the right approach, you would have to be deluding yourself.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the last thing I was going to say is, like, 5 years ago, even 6 years ago, or 10 years ago, when I used to talk about China, they would say all the tier 1 cities are fake, right? It's just bells and whistles. Like, they're not nice, because these are people who've never been, right?
Right.
Now, when I came back from China, I thought it was fascinating that they were like, okay, the tier 1 cities are actually much nicer than ours, but you didn't go to the rural countryside. You didn't see how underdeveloped the rural countride is. And yes, it's true.
It's even better.
Well, the countryside, the countryside is obviously, like, there are certain parts of the Chinese countryside that isn't as developed as like the tier 1 cities, certainly. But in comparison to the trajectory of development in areas that are still, being built out, they clearly have a positive trajectory, as opposed to like going to Buffalo, New York, going to all of these like forgotten towns in the heartland of America, where you realize that like there was industry here in the past and it's gone now, and they're ghost cities. Like, that's how I felt traveling around the country, where I was like, there used to be people here. There used to be commerce here. There used to be economic activity here. And now it's all gone.
So here's a hypothetical for you. If you, and if you don't know the answer, that's totally fine, because it's not fair for me to ask this. But let's say that the president, there's a Democratic president in the next few years, or 2028, and they are thinking about China and thinking about China policy, and they're or just thinking about what we can learn from China, and they call you up and they say, Hasan, what can you tell me about what we can do concretely in terms of policy, either domestically or foreign policy wise, with regards to China? Like, what would you recommend them?
Oh, I would immediately reverse the decades of anti-China hawkery and immediately move to a cooperative agreement with China, like instantly.
What do you mean by that? Like economically? Like an economic
cooperation, which already exists, obviously, but I would take a much less
so you would bring the
hawkish
tariffs
approach.
down. You would take the tariffs down.
None of that. Obviously, none of
Would
that.
you let
but
Jensen
also,
Huang sell NVIDIA chips to China's best companies?
Yeah, I don't. All of that stuff. I think is so frivolous. And in any case, it's almost helped Chinese development in that area as well, because then they just like find a way around it. And then they're making like, the indigenous production is an inevitability. So it's like, I find it ridiculous to try to approach foreign nations as adversaries in general. I think it's a ridiculous approach. It's a silly approach. I believe in internationalism. So I would immediately tell them no more. We're only focusing on international cooperation from this day on. If I had the magic wand to somehow overcome, I don't know, decades, if not centuries of like hatred that the average American has. And oftentimes this average, the economic interest that they have in like a complete domination of all of these other countries. Within the confines of permissibility, I would say that I probably would move the IMF World Bank structure that has existed, that has dominated the global South, to a more tolerant approach as well. No more focus on austerity. No more forcing developing nations to have to work with foreign capital and foreign investments, and just like allow them room to develop. I would try to get America to become more Chinese, is what I'm saying. If you want to quote unquote beat China, you have to become more like China. Now, do I think that we will have the process? Do I think that we have enough time to even engage in such competition? No, I don't. So I think international cooperation is the way. Maybe I'm wrong.
Great.
Maybe I'm foolhardy about this, but I do think that, as you've said as well, like it kind of feels like China wants things to just be stable on the international front. Like they value stability quite a bit, a lot more than they want to engage in like any sort of like militant posture against the United States of America or anyone else for that matter.
Yeah, I think it's harder to, like, I think one context that I think is important is that this kind of anti-China posturing, I mean, of course, there's many sources, but one of the genuine sources of anti-China posturing has been cybersecurity issues. Like, China has been really aggressive in the past few years on like cybersecurity, and like the way that what I mean by that is like spying. Like, there's been like major spying efforts in the US, and that has really alarmed a lot of policymakers. So when you talk to people like in the Trump administration in the first term, when they were sort of initially, starting up their anti-China sort of posture, which has kind of continued to now, they cite these like genuine kind of concerns about espionage and all these things. I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't know. Are you aware of that? And like, have you thought about?
I'm very aware of it. Yeah. There was a New York Times report that I read about how like they had the Chinese government has basically infiltrated the telecommunications grid in its entirety.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are these concerns. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think that this kind of, I mean, from what I understand, even the New York Times' takeaway was they were more so invested in trying to figure out who were like, who out of their people were like compromised. Like as far as like the actual, the actual like ambassadors or agents that they have, that's what they were more so tracking rather than like, I don't know, maybe not finding like compromising information or something. I'm sure that was also a part of the process, but I think all of that is a direct consequence of the militant posture that America engages in, where I don't think there's any reason for countries to truly engage one another in this like militant fashion. even countries that have been historically considered foreign adversaries. Maybe I have a naive approach to it, but I always think about like the European continent, which was at war with one another for centuries until not that long ago, including World War II. And now there is a mutual understanding, a security cooperation there, and a much more tolerant approach to these nation states. And I feel like we can expand on that mentality across the board, not just through different continents, not just through the European Union, but like have a more global approach to that kind of security arrangement that revolves around mutual respect and understanding of both differences and isn't so heavily focused on trying to go to war with one another all the time.
Gotcha. Thanks, Hasan. Appreciate it.
Of course, no problem.
Thanks for listening to Into Asia. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to my Substack, Recent Works by Chang Che. See you next time.